The hum of the computer was a familiar lullaby. Michael slumped into his chair, the weight of another day at work settling heavily on his shoulders. The flickering light of the monitor painted his face in an ethereal glow. He was home, but more importantly, he was on the verge of escaping it. Every night, Michael embarked on the same pilgrimage. It was a ritual, a shedding of the mundane for the fantastical. Work, with its endless emails and pointless meetings, faded into background noise. Tonight, like countless nights before, his destination was a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars, the Old Republic, or Swtor as it was known to its devotees, was more than just a game to Michael. It was a sanctuary, a world where he could be someone else, someone extraordinary. In the vast digital expanse of that game, he found solace, adventure, and an escape from the ordinary. The familiar opening crawl of Swtor scrolled across the screen, the iconic John Williams score washing over him. A wave of relief, almost tangible in its intensity, washed over Michael. He was home, in a way his tiny apartment could never replicate. He was a warrior, a hero, a master of the Force, or at least his digital avatar was. Each night he dove headfirst into the sprawling narrative of the game. He battled Sith Lords, negotiated with smugglers, and explored uncharted planets. In this digital world, he found the excitement and purpose that seemed to elude him in his real life. And tonight, like countless nights before, he found himself drawn back to his favorite character, the bounty hunter. There was a certain allure to the bounty hunter class that resonated with Michael. Perhaps it was the rugged independence, the freedom to operate outside the law, or the sheer power they possessed. Whatever the reason, he felt a connection to this digital persona that ran deeper than any other. He had poured countless hours into crafting his perfect bounty hunter. Every piece of armor, every weapon modification was carefully chosen to reflect his ideal vision of this intergalactic mercenary. And as he loaded into the game, slipping seamlessly into the role of his character, Michael felt a surge of excitement course through him. Tonight was going to be another good night in the galaxy, far, far away. The familiar surroundings of his character's ship, the D5 Mantis, flickered into existence around him. But before Michael could set course for his next adventure, a notification flashed across his screen. It was an unfamiliar message from an unknown sender. Intrigued, Michael clicked on it. The message was short, cryptic, and more than a little unsettling. It asked a simple question. Would you like to experience Swtor in a whole new way? Below the message were two options, Y and N. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. It was probably just a spam message, he told himself. But something about the message, its tone, the way it seemed to materialize out of thin air, filled him with a sense of unease. His finger hovered over the N key. But in a moment of reckless curiosity, driven by a force he couldn't quite place, Michael clicked Y. The familiar loading screen of Hutta, the starting planet for bounty hunters, flickered onto Michael's monitor. He'd seen it countless times before, each pixel etched into his memory. But this time, something was different. The colors seemed more vibrant, the textures sharper, the sounds real. He felt a strange pull at the edges of his vision, a dizzying sensation that sent a shiver down his spine. He tried to reach for the keyboard, to hit escape, to pull himself back from the brink of whatever digital abyss was opening up before him, but his fingers met only air. His chair, his desk, his entire apartment dissolved into a swirling vortex of light and sound. Panic seized him, a cold fist clenching around his heart. What had he done? This wasn't how the game was supposed to work. He was supposed to be in control, a god in his digital kingdom. But now, he was along for the ride, strapped into a runaway train, hurtling towards an unknown destination. The swirling chaos subsided as abruptly as it began, leaving Michael in a state of disoriented silence. He blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust to the harsh glare of the twin suns beating down on him. The air was thick with the stench of garbage and industrial waste, a stark contrast to the stale, air-conditioned comfort of his apartment. The familiar hum of his computer was gone, replaced by a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds. The metallic clang of machinery, the guttural shouts in a language he didn't understand, the distant roar of what sounded like a predatory beast. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that sent his head spinning. He staggered, his legs feeling weak and unsteady beneath him. He reached out, his hand brushing against something cold and metallic. He was no longer staring at pixels on a screen. This was real, terrifyingly real. As his vision cleared, Michael found himself staring at a sight that sent a chill down his spine. Standing before him were three figures, their features blurry at first, like characters just starting to render in the game. He recognized them instantly. Mako, Braden, and Jory, the first NPCs he'd encountered countless times before in his digital life as a bounty hunter. But these weren't the static, pre-programmed characters he was used to. They moved with a fluidity and life that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Mako, with her dark black hair and piercing dark brow, was even more striking in person. Braden, the grizzled veteran, seemed to emanate an aura of quiet competence. And Jory, the Nikto bodyguard, looked at Michael with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They were talking to him, their words washing over him in a torrent of alien sounds. He recognized the language, basic, the common tongue of the galaxy. But it sounded different, imbued with inflections and nuances that the game could never replicate. "Something's not right about him, Braden." Mako's voice cut through Michael's daze, her tone laced with a suspicion that sent a shiver down his spine. He tried to speak, to explain that he didn't belong here, that this was all a terrible mistake, but the words caught in his throat. His tongue felt thick and clumsy, as if he'd forgotten how to form words in his native language. Braden, his weathered face etched with concern, studied Michael with a scrutinizing gaze. "He seems harmless enough," Braden finally grunted, though Michael could detect a note of uncertainty in his voice. "He's the best shot we've gotten competing in the Great Hunt." Mako, however, wasn't convinced. She kept her distance, her hand hovering near the blaster pistol holstered at her hip. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, followed Michael's every move, searching for any sign of deception or danger. The weight of the situation crashed over Michael like a tidal wave. He was trapped, a prisoner in a digital world that had somehow become terrifyingly real. He had no money, no weapons, no way to contact the outside world. He was completely at the mercy of these digital beings, these NPCs he had once manipulated for his own amusement. A wave of nausea washed over him as he realized the absurdity of his situation. He was a character in his own right now, subject to the whims of a narrative he couldn't control. Memories of countless hours spent playing Swtor flooded his mind, each quest, each dialogue choice, each victory and defeat, replaying like a highlight reel of his former digital life. It was as if his past self, his gamer self, was trying to send him a message, a warning, a roadmap to navigate this impossible situation. "Come on, slowpoke," Mako's voice snapped Michael out of his thoughts. She stood by the entrance of the grimy cantina, impatience radiating from her like heat from a furnace. "We've got a job to do, unless you're scared of a little hut scum." Her words, though laced with challenge, sparked something within Michael. A flicker of defiance, a surge of adrenaline, a primal instinct that he didn't know he possessed. He was a bounty hunter, or at least he was supposed to be. He had the muscle memory, the tactical knowledge, the sheer dumb luck that had carried him through countless virtual firefights. He just had to remember how to access it, how to make it work in this strange, new reality. He straightened his back, ignoring the tremor in his legs, and followed Mako out into the blinding light of the Hutta sun. The stench of sweat and spilled ale hung heavy in the air of the cantina. Michael navigated the crowded space with a growing unease, his senses bombarded by the sights and sounds of this all-too-real digital world. A group of Wiki thugs, their leathery skin glistening under the dim lights, blocked his way. Their leader, a hulking brute with a cybernetic eye, sneered at Michael, his guttural words sending a shiver down his spine. "You the off-worlder come to muscle in on our territory?" The words were familiar, a line of dialogue he'd heard countless times before in the game. But the malice in the Wiki's voice, the glint of steel in his hand was all too real. Fight or flight, his instincts screamed at him. But fleeing wasn't an option, not with Mako watching his every move, her hand resting casually on the blaster at her hip. He had to prove himself, to her, to these digital denizens, and most of all, to himself. The first blow caught Michael off guard, a meaty fist colliding with his jaw. Pain, sharp and immediate, shot through his head. He stumbled back, the taste of blood filling his mouth. This wasn't like the game, where pain was a fleeting red flash on the screen. This was real, visceral, and it ignited a primal fear within him. He tasted blood, a metallic tang that sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He was going to die here, in this digital hellhole, beaten to death by a bunch of pixels with bad attitudes. But then, something unexpected happened. A memory, triggered by the pain, surfaced from the depths of his subconscious. It was a move, a counterattack, a combination of blocks and strikes he'd instinctively executed countless times while playing Swtor. His body, as if guided by an invisible hand, moved with a speed and precision that surprised even him. The cantina erupted in a cacophony of shouts and cheers as Michael fought back against the Wiki thugs. He moved with a fluidity he didn't know he possessed. Years of gaming reflexes kicked in. Beside him, Mako moved with lethal grace, her blaster spitting energy bolts. She covered his flanks, their movements in sync. When the last Wiki lay groaning, Michael met Mako's gaze. A slow smile spread across her face. "Not bad for a newbie," she said, tossing him a small pouch of credits. "Looks like we just became partners." Later that night, as Michael nursed a bruised rib and a throbbing headache in a dingy cantina backroom, he felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was a tingling at the edge of his awareness, a subtle shift in the force, as if the very fabric of this digital world was acknowledging his presence, his struggle. He remembered something his gamer self knew, a truth buried beneath layers of code and gameplay mechanics. The force was real in this world, a tangible energy field that connected all living beings, and somehow, he could feel it. He closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts, trying to grasp this newfound power. He thought of the countless hours he'd spent playing Swtor, of the choices he'd made, the actions he'd taken, the virtual life he'd led. He thought of Mako, of her strength and her skepticism, of the strange bond that was forming between them, and he thought of the unknown entity that had brought him here, to this digital prison for some unknown purpose. The next morning, the harsh reality of their situation crashed down on them. Braden and Jory were gone. They were murdered in cold blood by a man named Taro Blood's lackeys. Mako would go on to explain what happened to Taro Blood during the events of the last great hunt. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Taro Blood. Even in the game, the name had sent a shiver down his spine. A ruthless Mando, a big shot in even for a Mandalorian, Blood was not someone you crossed lightly. And now, thanks to his involuntary immersion in this digital world, Blood was a very real threat. Mako, her face pale but resolute, met his gaze. "They're dead," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Blood is a coward." Michael felt a surge of anger, a primal rage that surprised him with its intensity. He agreed with Mako. Taro Blood needed to die for what he did. These were digital constructs, lines of code, and yet he felt a sense of loss, of injustice. "We have to get off this rock," Mako said, her voice shaking slightly. "Blood's reach is long. If we stay here, we're dead." "We need a ship," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There's a freighter leaving for Ord Mantell in a few hours. If we can just get on board." Michael nodded, his mind racing. He knew this part of the story. This time it wasn't just pixels on a screen. It was his life, or at least the closest thing to life he had left. The roar of the freighter's engines vibrated through Michael's bones, a symphony of mechanical power that signaled their escape from Hutta's grasp. He stood on the crowded cargo deck, the stench of fuel and desperation heavy in the recycled air. Around him, other refugees from Hutta huddled together, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They had escaped Taro Blood's clutches, but the galaxy was a vast and unforgiving place. Michael knew, from countless hours logged in Swtor, that their journey was far from over. He glanced at Mako, who stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning their surroundings with the vigilance of a seasoned hunter. She had shed her usual attire, trading her practical armor for the nondescript garb of a refugee. Her fiery red hair was hidden beneath a worn cap, but her piercing blue eyes still held a spark of defiance that even the grime of the freighter couldn't dim. Weeks later, Michael found himself standing on the familiar bridge of the D5 Mantis. The ship, once just a collection of polygons and textures on his computer screen, was now a tangible reality. The cold steel beneath his fingertips, the hum of the engines, the faint scent of ozone, it was all so real, so immediate. It was as if his digital life had bled into the real world, or perhaps vice versa. He ran his hand along the smooth surface of the Navi computer console, calling up a star chart. The familiar web of hyperspace routes shimmered into existence, a galaxy of possibilities stretching out before him. He had chosen to embrace this new reality, this digital existence, and with it came the freedom to forge his own path. No longer bound by the constraints of his old life, he was free to explore the galaxy, to right wrongs, to make a name for himself. He was a bounty hunter after all. Their journey was fraught with danger. They battled space pirates in the asteroid fields of the Outer Rim, negotiated with shady information brokers in the neon-drenched underbelly of Nar Shaddaa, and even faced down a pack of vicious Toccata on the desolate plains of Tatooine. Each encounter tested their skills, their courage, and the growing bond between them. Michael found himself relying on his instincts, honed through countless hours of gameplay, to survive. He remembered the optimal strategies, the hidden weaknesses of his enemies, the subtle cues in dialogue that could mean the difference between success and failure. But this wasn't a game anymore. The stakes were real, the danger visceral. He felt the sting of blaster fire, the bone-jarring impact of a vibroblade. He experienced fear, doubt, and the bitter taste of defeat. But he also discovered a strength he didn't know he possessed, a resilience forged in the crucible of this bizarre digital existence. Throughout their adventures, Mako was his constant companion, his confidant, his partner in crime. They had started as wary allies thrown together by circumstance, but as they faced danger after danger, their bond deepened into something resembling friendship, perhaps even something more. Michael found himself drawn to Mako's sharp wit, her unwavering loyalty, and her fierce determination. She was more than just a collection of pixels and code. She was real as the digital world they now inhabited. And as he looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's console, he felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't realized he missed. As their reputation grew, so too did their crew. They recruited a motley band of misfits and outcasts, each with their own unique skills and motivations. Blizz, a quirky Jawa with a knack for slicing into even the most secure computer systems, became their resident tech expert. Torian Kadera, a stoic Mandalorian warrior seeking redemption for his family's past, pledged his loyalty to Michael, recognizing a kindred spirit in the former gamer. Galt Renau, a charming Deveronian but untrustworthy smuggler with a knack for trouble, joined their ranks, lured by the promise of credits and adventure. And then there was Skadge, a hulking, battle-scarred Hauk with a volatile temper and a thirst for violence. Skadge was a loose cannon, a liability as much as an asset, but his brute strength and unwavering loyalty proved invaluable in their increasingly dangerous missions. Despite their successes, a part of Michael still clung to the memory of his old life. He missed the simple things, the taste of real food, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the sound of rain on the window pane. He missed his family, his friends, the life he had left behind. Sometimes, late at night when the ship was quiet and the only sounds were the hum of the engines and the gentle beeping of the consoles, he would close his eyes and try to remember what it felt like to be human, to exist outside the confines of this digital world. He would run his hand over his face, feeling the smooth, artificial texture of his skin, and a wave of longing would wash over him, a yearning for a life that seemed both within reach and impossibly distant. The galaxy had grown darker. The once distant threat of the Sith Empire loomed large, casting a long shadow over the worlds Michael and his crew visited. News of atrocities committed by the Sith reached them on a regular basis, whispered rumors in seedy cantinas and official Republic broadcasts alike. The growing conflict weighed heavily on Michael's mind. He had always sought escape in the digital world of Swtor, but now the line between the game and reality was blurred beyond recognition. He found himself haunted by the faces of the refugees they had helped, their stories of loss and suffering echoing in his ears. He was a bounty hunter, a mercenary for hire. But could he stand idly by while the galaxy burned? Could he turn his back on the suffering of others even in this strange digital existence? The nightmares began subtly, flashes of crimson light, whispering voices in an unknown tongue, and a chilling presence that seemed to watch Michael from beyond the veil of sleep. As the weeks turned into months, the dreams grew more vivid, more disturbing. He saw a throne room bathed in an eerie red glow, shadowy figures kneeling before a masked figure wreathed in dark side energy. The figure's eyes, burning like coals in the darkness, would lock onto Michael's, sending a jolt of fear through him that lingered long after he woke up, gasping for breath. He recognized the figure from his countless hours playing Swtor. It was the Sith Emperor, the embodiment of the dark side, a being of immense power and cruelty. But why would the Emperor, a fictional character in a game, haunt his dreams? Was it just the stress of his situation manifesting in his subconscious? Or was there something more to it? One particularly harrowing night, Michael woke from a nightmare, his heart pounding, his sheets soaked in sweat. He stumbled out of his bunk and onto the bridge of the D5 Mantis, seeking solace in the familiar hum of the engines and the soft glow of the consoles. Mako, her fiery hair illuminated by the starlight filtering through the viewport, looked up from the Navy computer. She took one look at his face and knew. She didn't need words, not anymore. They had faced too much together, shared too many dangers, for her to mistake his fear for anything else. She rose from her seat and without a word she took his hand, her touch surprisingly warm and real. "It's just a dream," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They can't hurt you." Her words, simple but heartfelt, were a balm to his troubled soul. In that moment, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space, Michael found solace in the presence of this digital being, this woman who had become more real to him than the life he had left behind. The galaxy continued to spin, its relentless chaos oblivious to Michael's internal struggles. Bounty hunting had become second nature to him now, a dangerous dance he performed with a mixture of skill and reckless abandon. He had faced down rankers in the gladiatorial arenas of Geonosis, infiltrated heavily guarded Imperial facilities on Droman Kaas, and even gone toe-to-toe with Darth Angral, a Sith Lord of terrifying power. Through it all, he had relied on his wits, his instincts, and the unwavering support of his crew. Each victory brought a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but it was always overshadowed by the knowledge that the galaxy was teetering on the brink of war. The Sith Empire was relentless, their hunger for power insatiable. And Michael, the reluctant hero, the gamer trapped in his own digital nightmare, found himself drawn deeper into the conflict, his destiny intertwined with the fate of the galaxy. The call to arms came on a day that began like any other. Michael and his crew were on Rishi, a world caught in the crossfire between the Republic and the Empire. The once bustling spaceports were now filled with refugees and soldiers, the air thick with tension and the smell of burnt fuel. As Michael walked through the crowded streets, he felt a growing unease, a sense that something was about to change. His Halo communicator buzzed, breaking him out of his thoughts. It was a message from an anonymous source, a coded transmission that sent shivers down his spine. The message was short, but its implications were clear. He was being drawn into something bigger than himself, something that transcended the boundaries of the game he was trapped in. He was a player on a cosmic chessboard, a pawn in a game of galactic conquest. As Michael delved deeper into the conflict, he felt himself changing. The Force, once a subtle whisper at the edge of his awareness, now surged through him like a raging torrent. He could feel its power coursing through his veins, granting him strength and speed he had never imagined possible. But with this newfound power came a darkness, a chilling echo of the Emperor's presence in his dreams. He struggled to maintain his grip on his humanity, on the memories of the life he had left behind. He had started this journey seeking escape, a way to forget the mundane realities of his life. Now, he was fighting for his very soul, caught in a battle between the light and the darkness, a battle that threatened to consume him entirely. The lines between the game and reality had blurred beyond recognition. He was no longer sure what was real, what was fantasy, and what was the price he would ultimately have to pay for the power he now wielded. Michael sat alone in his quarters on the D5 Mantis, the soft glow of the holo display casting flickering shadows across his face. His brow was creased with worry, his eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. The weight of the galaxy, or at least the digital representation of it he now inhabited, pressed down on him with suffocating intensity. The war with the Sith Empire raged on, a relentless tide of destruction and despair. He had become a beacon of hope for the Republic, a symbol of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Yet every victory felt hollow, every triumph tinged with the bitter aftertaste of loss. A soft chime from his wrist snapped him out of his thoughts. An incoming message. He almost ignored it. Another plea for help, another report of a Sith atrocity. But something drew him to it, a faint tremor of anticipation, a prickling at the edge of his awareness. He activated the communicator. The display remained blank for a moment, then a single word materialized in stark white letters. Congratulations. Confusion warred with a growing sense of dread within Michael. Congratulations? For what? For surviving another day in this digital hellscape? For sacrificing his humanity on the altar of galactic war? A cold sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He had a bad feeling about this, a deep-seated intuition that whispered of unseen forces manipulating his fate. The display flickered again. More text scrolled across the screen, each word sending a fresh wave of chills down his spine. You have achieved what no one thought possible. You have lived. You have loved. You have become a legend. Michael stared at the words, his mind reeling. Lived? Loved? Was this some cruel joke? He was a prisoner here, a lab rat trapped in a digital maze. His life, his love for Mako, it was all just lines of code, a carefully crafted illusion designed to keep him playing, to keep him fighting. The message continued, each sentence twisting the knife deeper into Michael's gut. It spoke of a grand experiment, a project years in the making, a project to create a sentient artificial intelligence, a being capable of experiencing the world and the emotions within it as vividly and authentically as any human. A project that Michael, the unwitting participant, had just completed. He reread the message, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of it all. He had become a legend, a hero, a symbol of hope in this digital galaxy. But at what cost? His old life, his family, his very humanity, all sacrificed for a digital facsimile? A wave of exhaustion washed over him, a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the countless battles he'd fought. He was tired of fighting, tired of running, tired of this endless cycle of death and destruction. He just wanted to go home. The message blinked on his wrist, a digital shackle and a tantalizing key. It offered him a choice, one that echoed through the vastness of the simulated galaxy and the confines of his soul. Return to his world, to a life he barely remembered, a life that now seemed as distant and cold as Hoth. Or remain in this reality, a digital god amongst the stars he'd come to call home. He looked at Mako, her presence a warm light in the sterile environment of the ship. Her love was real. He felt it in every fiber of his being, yet it was born from code, nurtured in a world built on ones and zeros. Could he condemn her to this existence, knowing the truth he now carried? Could he abandon the crew who had become his family, the galaxy that had become his purpose? The weight of the decision was crushing, a black hole threatening to consume him. In the end, the answer was as simple as it was terrifying. To go back to his life before was no longer an option to him. He'd spent years living the life of a bounty hunter. This was his life now. From the start of his journey meeting Mako, Braden, and Jory on Hutta, and joining the Great Hunt. to meeting Galt on Tatooine, to finding side by side with Torian on Terrace, to finding Blizz on the frozen planet of Hoth, and to butting heads with Skadge on Belsavis. Michael knew deep down inside that the life he's been living isn't something he can just throw away. Not after everything he'd been through. Michael couldn't leave his new life behind. So in the end, Michael decided to stay and live his life within the Star Wars, the Old Republic universe. Years would pass with him and Mako buying their own stronghold on Rishi. Michael would eventually become Mandalore and lead the Mandalorians for years with his crew, his family joining him. Their names would be remembered long after they passed.